My producer was telling me, and she's a millennial, right? And she was telling me when she was in high school, they had to read Howard Zinn book, and I had never heard of Howard Zinn, and so you wrote a book called "Debunking Howard Zinn: Exposing the Fake History That Turned a Generation Against America." Explain to folks who was Howard Zinn and why was he so significant?
Yeah, well, that's interesting that your producer had to read that. My condolences.
Thank God she held on to her sanity, though.
Yeah, she's working for you, right?
Yes, that's right. Her parents were pretty conservative too, so that helped a lot.
Yeah. Well, Howard Zinn lures in a lot of young people, even my friends who are very conservative Christians. Their kids, their millennials,
right,
have been sort of seduced by Howard Zinn. But Howard Zinn died in 2010. He was born in 1922. And he grew up in Brooklyn. His parents were Russian Jewish immigrants. He grew up fairly lower class. But when he was growing up, it was the 1930s, and that was the heyday of communist recruitment. And he got lured in as a teenager. And, in his autobiography, he talks about how he saw that this system was not a fair system. The American system was not fair, and it was not just. And so he started believing in the tenets of Marxism. He actually was a member of the Communist Party from about 1948 to 1953. His FBI file that's close to 500 pages long shows that. Now, I'm relying mostly on an analysis by someone who had been in the Communist Party very briefly.
Yeah.
So, and he said, well, this has all the hallmarks, even though Howard Zinn denied it, his entire life. He had been a member, but he dropped his membership in order to go teach at Spelman College in Atlanta,
right,
a small Christian school for Black women. And there he set about to radicalizing all of them. One of his students was Alice Walker.
Oh, yeah, I know who that was.
Yeah.
What a mess.
Yeah. So he went there. He was fired by the college president for insubordination because he was setting the students against the administration.
Wow.
He was not, ostensibly he was taking them on civil rights protests, but he was doing much more than that. He was getting them thrown in jail. He was encouraging them not to go to chapel or follow the dress code or stick to curfew. And so he was fired, but he soon landed on his feet and spent the rest of his career teaching at Boston University, where he then radicalized those students and led protests against the Vietnam War, actually went to Hanoi, colluded with the communist regime there to bring back our POWs, and just spent a lifetime corrupting students, radicalizing them, writing these books and articles that are full of lies, and they remain with us. Howard Zinn's book is still being published. It's still a bestseller.
The book is called A People History of the United States.
Yeah, it's sold over 3 million copies.
The parents are not aware of this book, and that's why they're able to get away with it?
Well, yeah, a lot of parents don't know, but think about this. It's been out for 42 years. So a lot of the parents have been educated with Howard Zinn's book. They think it's the truth. A lot of them have not been exposed to anything else. And that's why I wrote my book, because I went through it and I said, and I showed this is not simply a left-wing version of American history. but it's illegitimate. Howard Zinn leaves out parts of quotations. He's very deceptive. So if an author says A, Howard Zinn makes it out to be B because he leaves out those critical words. You know, he misrepresents people. He lies. He just presents misinformation and presents this rosy picture off in the distance of a socialist regime, and actually encourages violence and, you know, violent protest and overthrow of the government.
Two quick things I want to ask you about concerning that. When I was growing up, black people, and this was before the so-called civil rights movement, black people were not so easily seduced into communism and hated white folks and blaming others. And I grew up on a plantation in Alabama, and they did have the Jim Crow law, but we knew it was the Democratic Party not wanting black people, and that all white people did not agree with that. Can you tell me, and so they were not easily seduced, what happened to the blacks? And it sounded like they were educated and all that, but what happened? How did these people know that they can seduce black people into socialism or communism? How did they know that? What was it about the blacks that allowed them to know that?
Well, you know, the Communist Party, since it established, you know, its first office in New York in 1919, has been targeting Black people, and it has been working on starting a civil war between Blacks and whites. And you are correct, because the surveys showed, even though Howard Zinn lies about them, that you know, Black people were always suspicious of communists and of radical left-wingers, because they knew from, like, the Scottsboro case that, you know, the case where the 9 young Black men were charged with raping 2 white women in 1931. The communists wanted to keep those guys in jail. They would have been happy if they died in jail because they were raising money. But you have people like Howard Zinn, who in the 60s, you know, probably by orders of, you know, the directors of the Communist Party, went into the classroom. And they don't present this as, okay, now we're going to be like Stalin. It's going to be, oh, we're going to have social justice. You know, the communists want to end Jim Crow laws. They've always lied about that. What the communists did, and I've got another book that I've been working on a conservative Black journalist by the name of George Schuyler. He could see this, and he tried to warn the community. He was writing for the Pittsburgh Courier. These people, the communists, are not out for your well-being. They want to see strife. They want to see violence. They wanted them as sort of the shock troops for the Marxist revolution. And that's what Howard Zinn wanted as well. And Howard Zinn, you know, if you read a people's history, you would think from just reading that, that, you know, Black people were behind, you know, the Marxists and the socialists, and they were not. It's just a lie.
Right.
And that's what they do. They lie about it. And, you know, Howard Zinn personally, he was a very charming person. The young women at Spelman College were captivated by him. He was tall and good looking. Actually, one of the things that Albert Manley, the college president who fired him, held over his head was a morals charge against Howard Zinn with one of the students from Spelman College. So in the late 50s and the 60s, there was this campaign to go into the Black colleges and to spread Marxism.
Amazing.
So there were white student organizers who went to Howard University. Howard Zinn went to Spelman College, and one by one, they just started changing things.
That's amazing. When I was younger, I heard that the communism had infiltrated the so-called civil rights movement, and that they had become a part of that. And I didn't believe it at first, but now that I'm older and I'm learning more and more how they operate, I believe that now that was possible. And also, I saw a documentary once about how some of the unions got started. And what they did was during the civil rights movement, according to the documentary, they looked for the angry people, the people who were complaining they had, about the system and all that. And a lot of black people at that time, and still are, were angry and complaining. And so the unions recruited them because they was complainers. And that's how at least some of the unions got started, by bringing in the angry people. You find that to be true?
Yeah, I mean, for the research I've done on the Howard Zinn book and my George Schuyler biography, George Schuyler, he wrote this column about the Watts riots. He blamed the white socialist beatniks. Remember that term, beatniks?
Yeah.
That's from the 1950s. You know who was behind the Newark riots?
Who's that?
Tom Hayden.
And who was Tom Hayden?
He was a member of the SDS, the Students for a Democratic Society. He was a leader, this 1960s radical group, mostly made up of, white college kids. Tom Hayden went down into Newark and he started stirring up trouble.
That's amazing.
No, there's this whole history that has been suppressed. And of course, the historians that are now writing the books, they've been taught by these people. Yeah. And so there's this worshipfulness of the communists, and they wanted the rioting, they wanted violence. They didn't care about civil rights. They cared about overthrowing the government. Civil rights was just a pretense.
Yeah.
You want to change the system, and Howard Zinn said this. He talked about using the equal access under the Civil Rights Act. He saw that as a great thing, not because everyone was able to go where they wanted to a restaurant or a hotel as they should, but because it would redefine private property. He didn't like the idea of private property.
Amazing.
Yeah, it really is. It's
so amazing. Let me ask, are you aware or not, are you aware if Martin Luther King Jr. and the so-called civil rights leaders, did they know that this so-called movement was infiltrated by communism, and did they support that idea?
Well, yeah, that's a very tricky subject. The Stanley Levison, I don't know if you've heard that name.
I may have, I don't remember.
Yeah, he was the guy who financed what Martin Luther King Jr. was doing. And King was warned by the Kennedy administration and to cut ties with Stanley Levison and a few other people. King lied about that. He did not cut ties. Stanley Levison said he had been a member of the Communist Party, but no longer was. However, it's now come out, I think David Garrow has written about this, he's a historian, that Levison remained in the Communist Party. So there were these people around King who were manipulating him. And, unfortunately, he got caught up in that. And these were not good people who were around him. And Stanley Levison certainly was not. his main goal was not equal rights. It was something much bigger. It was anti-American. And I think, the movement went off the tracks. And of course, after the 1963 March on Washington, if you remember, King started becoming more radical.
Yeah.
He started speaking out against the Vietnam War.
Right.
And, on the side of the North Vietnamese, right? I mean, just sounding very much like a communist. And his last effort was organizing the janitors. Was it in Memphis? I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that was really not a civil rights activity.
Yeah.
To me, civil rights is you have equal opportunity. You adhere to what he said in that speech, which is a favorite, that you're judged by the content of your character.
I think he was joking about that too.
Yeah. There's so much out there. I mean, Cornel West.
He is a mess.
But he likes King. He likes the radical King. And
Yeah.
he wrote a book about that. And as you may know, Nicole Hannah-Jones, the creator of the 1619 Project, in her talk at this club in Chicago, just amazed everyone because she started quoting King's speeches. But of course, the media pretends that she has discovered something new, which is not the case.
No, it's not. I want to get to that, and time is moving. So let me ask, I have so many things I want to know from you. I grew up, when I moved away from Alabama. Oh, let me tell you this. When the whole civil rights movement started, I was younger, of course, and I remember the older black people were not for it. They didn't agree with King, and they were called names and occatoms and things like that. But the older black people were speaking out against the movement, so-called movement, because I guess they could understand what was going on, and that it wasn't really what they said that it was. But those people were criticized and occatoms, and those people were not that educated either. They worked the farms and they knew what was going on. So I really realize now that they were being attacked for telling the truth.
Yeah, I mean, there was a survey that was done, in the mid-'60s that showed 51% of Black people opposed King.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that he was doing was he was recruiting little children into these protests.
Wow. Now I'm thinking that King went up to the mountaintop and he looked over and he saw communism in America. He didn't see the glory of the coming of the Lord. He saw communism. But what I want to ask you is that I'm surprised how many Jewish people are so liberal, and I'm surprised that they are like a part of a communist movement, because what I've heard about them and read about them, they went through hell, not supposedly, but they were like put on trains and they were murdered and killed and raped. They were taken away from their families. And if they have gone through all those types of pain, why would they want to be anywhere near liberalism or socialism or communism? Why would any Jewish person promote that?
I don't know. My Jewish friends wonder about the same thing.
Yeah.
They're conservative. They, some of them, a couple of them have, after Donald Trump was elected, have sort of fallen off the wagon, but it doesn't make sense.
No.
I don't know. I mean, it's sort of like someone coming from a communist country and then saying, "Oh, well, let's have it here."
Yeah, exactly. That's mind-blowing to me. I would love to understand what is going on in their minds that they would support communism and socialism in a free country. It just doesn't make sense.